Hello, welcome back to my channel. It's Emma. I hope you are cozy and you have a drink or a blanket because I've just gotten very cozy and I'm about to talk about all the books I read in December. Today is actually the last day of December, so I thought it was the perfect time to sit down and finally film my last wrap up of the year, which is very exciting. I have a lot of books to talk about. I sadly only have 2 words that I learned this month. Very sad, but hopefully there will be more next time, but they are interesting words. So that is kind of that on the word segment, closing it off on a rather anticlimactic word learning. I don't know. But let's just get into it. I do have a lot of books to get through. I do not plan to finish any more books before the end of the year, but as of right now, I know a lot of people have been asking. I read 151 books this year, so that's cool, that's fun, that's a lot of books, and let's talk about the last of them. The first book that I read in December, I absolutely loved. I adored it. I can't stop staring at these two. That was Count Karlstein by Philip Pullman. This was originally a play that he wrote for his English students when he was an English teacher. It was written in 1982, I believe, but it is now a middle grade, extremely charming, extremely wintry, extremely spooky book, and I adored it. This is my first Philip Pullman that I've read outside of his Dark Materials series, and I loved it. I fell so in love with it. It was so charming and quirky and strange. It kind of read like a Studio Ghibli film, which was so fun. And in this book we are following 2 sisters, Lucy and Charlotte. I just want to say almost every single book I read this month either had a Lucy in it or a Charlotte in it or a Lucy and a Charlotte in it. We're following Lucy and Charlotte, and they are the nieces of Count Karlstein, who lives up at Karlstein Manor, I guess, and he is trying to solidify his place as the rightful heir because there's this whole thing that he's not actually the right person to inhabit and to take over this castle, and so he's trying to make a deal with the demon huntsman named Zamiel, who rides through the forest and kills everything he sees on All Souls Eve. So Count Karlstein decides that his 2 nieces are going to be the sacrifices for Zamiel in order to cement his place as the rightful heir. This whole book also reads like the funniest kind of Monty Python sketch ever. We have a huge cast of characters for such a small book, but they all kind of interweave and work together and fit so nicely and snap so tightly into place to make the funniest story. It's just, there's so many lighthearted moments, there's so many well-written moments. Each character is so defined. The characterization of every single person in this book is so real, so funny. At times it is a bit tropey in terms of the character traits, but I loved it. It worked so well for me. Like I said, there's really fun moments, there's really dark moments, really spooky moments. I love the atmosphere. I think we're set in Switzerland, if I'm remembering that correctly, and it was just a really, really good time. I gave it 4 stars. Very much looking forward to kind of reading and collecting the rest of Philip Pullman's kind of bits and bobs of works that aren't connected to his very famous series, and I loved it. I was so impressed, honestly. It was such a nice way to start off Christmas with a little bit of snow, a little bit of spooky, and that is Count Karlstein. Next up, I listened to another audiobook, and that one was The Painted Girls by Cathy Marie Buchanan. This is historical fiction. The year is, I think, 1878, and once again, we're following sisters Charlotte, Marie, and Antoinette. They live in Paris, and they live with their mother, who is still extremely grieving the loss of her husband. They're very poor, and each day the 3 sisters go to the Paris Opera House to try and find work as either ballet dancers, stage hands, or basically anything they can. When the middle sister, Marie, catches the attention of the famous painter Edgar Degas, he asks her to be his model, and with a little bit of convincing, since modeling at the time was basically akin to selling yourself and would really degrade your social status, she finally accepts because he promises to pay her. And the younger sister, Charlotte, starts to work as a ballet dancer. Antoinette finds herself kind of scrambled up in this love affair with this man who might not be everything he says he is, as well as finding herself on the stage to play a small talking part in a play by Émile Zola, the very famous French writer, L'Assommoir. And she basically, how do I describe this? This whole book, I didn't like this book. I gave it 2.75 stars. I didn't think the writing or the way that Cathy Marie Buchanan chose to tell the story was extremely readable. Like, it wasn't very reader friendly. I really dreaded picking the book back up. It was extremely slow moving, extremely dry in my opinion, but I loved the ideas and I loved like the concepts and the real history that she is playing around with, because of course the very famous sculpture of the ballet dancer that Degas has, and Zola's novel all about washerwomen and people who are working in these neighborhoods in Paris who don't have very much. Just this whole concept of, how do I describe this? Like, taking these real people like Antoinette, who does work washing people's clothes, and then putting her on stage because Zola wants to create this real play featuring these real people and these real workers, but at the same time they're not really getting paid very well, they're not earning much money, and they can't rise above their station. And the play that Antoinette finds herself in just mirrors her own life, and it's so deterministic. It's saying that she can't ever get anywhere, she can't be happy because she doesn't have enough money to be happy. And just this whole book is so sad because it's people like Degas and people like Zola and these like very prominent, artistic, famous, rich, essentially figures of the day, plucking these real people who are struggling out of the Paris gutters and using them for their art, to call it real art. It's an extremely sad moment when you find Marie and Antoinette kind of standing in the middle of this art that is supposed to be their life, and finding that they can't take part in this artistic viewing, this artistic privilege, because they are on one side of the stage and the audience and these people who have this power are on the other. And it's just this really crushing, terrible moment. And the whole book is filled with stuff like that, and that whole kind of play around real life and art and these people who use and abuse people below their station to create the artistic vision, which was so interesting. It's so cool to see people like Antoinette and like Marie given a voice in here, because doing this stuff for Degas and being this famous sculpture that everyone loves, I think it's in New York right now, like didn't help her along at all. It actually made her life worse. And for Antoinette, who took part in this play and got involved with some of the actors, it made her life worse. Like I said, I love the ideas that were played around in here. I love that the story was finally told in this way from the perspectives of these three sisters who are the models, who are the people doing the hard work essentially. And it's just so crushing to kind of see that other side. So I loved that. I just don't think it was super well done. Like, for me, it didn't catch my interest. It didn't make me want to keep reading it. It felt quite long, very repetitive and dry, but I was really interested in the topics that were being discussed. So I would be super interested in reading something else along this vein. I just don't know if I would highly recommend this to everyone, because it didn't like captivate me. I wasn't wowed. I didn't enjoy the writing, but everything peripherally, yes. A book that definitely did wow me and captivate me and crush me and every single thing. The writing was incredible. Everything was incredible about this book. It's Giovannis Room by James Baldwin. Oh my goodness. Once again, in Paris, we're following this young man named David. He comes to Paris from America trying to find himself. He's not really sure what he's doing with his life. It doesn't really go well because he doesn't find himself. He very much loses himself in Giovanni and in Giovanni's room. Giovanni is another man. He's Italian. He's in Paris, he's working as a bartender, and David gets caught up with him and a circle of his friends who all attend this one bar. They form these disastrous relationships. David is also in connection with a woman who's currently away in Spain during this whole like foray and period in Paris, and it's just so suffocating, so devastating. Not like anyone in this book. This book is full of really horrible things, some really horrible people. It was so hard to read, but it was just so brilliantly done. This is my first James Baldwin book, and I can't wait to get my hands on more because I was so impressed. The feelings of guilt and hatred and love and I guess sacrifice and desperateness were so hard to read about, and it was just an extremely talentedly written book. So good. This is a book I also don't want to say too much about because I don't want to spoil anything. I don't want to give anything away. But it was just so tragic and awful and brilliant and lovely at the same time. So I would highly recommend Giovanni's Room. Unfortunately, the next two books I'm about to talk about were definitely not up to snuff. It was not a good time reading these next two books. So I will try to keep this short and sweet, or I guess short and bitter, but the first one is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This was one of the Dark Academics book picks for December, and it's very safe to say I really really, 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 really did not like it. I did not like it at all for a number of reasons. We have a live show that is still up on Carolyn's channel. It's always going to be up on Carolyn's channel if you would like to go and check it out, because it is full of spoilers and my in-depth thoughts, and all of our in-depth thoughts, we basically all shared the same opinions. None of us were really taken or found ourselves enjoying these violent delights very much, but this is an extremely loose Romeo and Juliet retelling, extremely loose. We're set in 1926 in Shanghai. We're following Roma and Juliet, who are of course part of two rival gangs, the Russian White Flowers and the Shanghai Scarlet gang. To make matters worse, outside of this blood feud, there is this plague or this virus or this disease that is going around Shanghai and making everyone, friend or foe, rip their own throats out and die. There's also some supernatural strange monster thing in this book, and that's all I'm going to say about the plot. My main problems, just to outline them extremely quickly: didn't think the writing was strong. It felt very immature, very young. It read like a very sloppy YA, in my opinion. I don't mean any of this to sound malicious at all. These are just my own opinions, and I know so many people love this book, and I am so gosh darn happy for them, because I wish I did. I really wish I had loved this book. Second problem was that this just was outside the realm of any plausible thing I could ever think of. Of course, there's so many elements of historical fiction in here, but it just did not jive well with these elements that I could not believe. So much surrounding this plague or this disease I could not buy into at all. I had so many just like logical arguments with myself and in my mind thinking, could this actually happen? And the answer was always no, not at all. Could not happen. My third problem was that I did not enjoy either Roma or Juliet. I detested both of our main characters, and I know in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet that's a little bit of the point, but there are some characters that you enjoy hating and you enjoy not liking, but I think we weren't really supposed to detest Roma and Juliet as much as I did in these violent delights. I didn't feel any connection, any romance, any consequences, or any relationship between them other than just flat, stale triteness. I thought the writing of certain scenes and dialogue was extremely cringy, awkward, stilted. I think if I had to kind of hand someone a book to try and explain to them with an example, like what is telling versus what is showing in writing, in novels, in literature, I would 100% list this as one of the books I would hand to someone to say, this is what you shouldn't do, because this whole book tells me absolutely everything. I feel like it never shows me anything. It constantly tells me what people's characteristics are. It tells me how certain things are going to play out. It tells me absolutely every single thing, and I just did not enjoy it at all, because that's not what a good novel should do. So I did enjoy the commentary and a little bit of the symbolism surrounding a lot of plot elements in this book. However, I just think this was not the book for me at all, because I didn't get along with any single element of it, and I was so let down, so disappointed. So that is These Violent Delights. Not really a delight though, was it? This next book was also a time. That is Red Riding Hood by Sarah Blackley Cartwright. I went on lots of big rants in a lot of vlogs that I filmed. This is based on the screenplay of the 2011 Red Riding Hood film, and oh boy. It was not very good. It was not very good. It was actually really bad. This book, first of all, had some of the worst writing I've witnessed this year. Everything was inconsistent. Characters were not believable at all. Everything was so awkward. One of the most awkward books I've read, both in terms of the writing, the general scenes, the way people interacted with each other. This book had no ending. The ending of this book is literally go to www.redridinghoodthemovie.com to find out how this book ends. A piece of literature should not be used as a marketing ploy for a different piece of media by the same name. I just think it was extremely awful. Like, who does that? So for that reason, and so many more reasons, I'm out. I read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This was my second Dickens book. This was also one of the Dark Academics book picks for December. I adored it. I'd never read A Christmas Carol before. I've never seen A Christmas Carol before. I'm so glad I finally got to read it with all of you guys. Safe to say I adored it. I think Dickens' writing is just so ultimately lovely. It's so lovely, so talented. Just every single sentence in here is filled with so much care and humor and like really sharp-sightedness into the lives of humans and Christmas and sadness. This book was an extremely emotional time for me as well, which I was not expecting. Was very taken aback by a lot of the scenes, especially with the ghost of Christmas past and present. I thought they were just so well done because I really just felt it, and it hurt so bad. As you will know, hopefully, Carolyn and I have now announced our Dickens versus Tolstoy The Great Debate book club. If you would like to join us, we will actually be rereading A Christmas Carol next December, so if you missed it this time, you can come along with us next year. But our book for January is of course one by Leo Tolstoy, so I won't say too much about it, but it's just so nice to have a little bit more Dickens under my belt before I start arguing with Carolyn about which author is better. But I'm just really happy to have read this. I think it was a really nice experience, especially around the holidays. I read it a few days before Christmas, so that is A Christmas Carol. The word I learned from A Christmas Carol is caustic, means marked by incisive sarcasm when it's being used in there to talk about Scrooge, and it comes from the Latin causticus, from the Greek kaustikos, which means to burn, so love that. I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. This was one of my favorite childhood films. It's probably still one of my favorite films. I just love it and adore it so much. The book was also a very charming, wonderful experience. I do want to say, I think the only critique I have, it's not really a critique, it's written extremely young. It is a children's book. A lot of it was a little bit like too on the nose for me and read a little bit too young. I think if I was younger, I would have enjoyed this so much more, but as it was, I still gave it 4 stars, and it was just such a nice time. If you've never heard of it, we're following 4 siblings, Lucy, Peter, Susan, and Edmund, and they make their way into Narnia, a magical fantasy land, through a wardrobe in England. And when they arrive in Narnia, there's this whole prophecy about them that they are the 4 humans destined to take down the White Witch, to restore order, to get rid of the eternal winter that is taking over Narnia, and it's just a really, really nice, sweet, wholesome read. After reading these Violent Delights, I was quite put out with young adult fiction, but this next book really just restored my faith, and I loved it. I loved it so much. This YA fantasy, it came out this year, was just so incredible, and that is A Song of Race and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. It was so good. It was so good. I gave it 4 stars. In this world, it's just such, oh my gosh, I just loved every single thing about it. The world building was incredible. The characters I felt so connected to. I felt like I knew who they were. I sympathized with them so much. I loved them so much. They felt so real to me. Every single person in this book felt like a real person who I could like reach out and shake their hand or hug, as I many times wanted to do with this book. But on 2 sides, basically, we are flipping perspectives from Malik, and he has just arrived in Zoran, where this whole book takes place. It is a city, and he's there with his 2 sisters, Nadia and Layla. And as soon as they arrive, there is this storyteller kind of outside the gates of Zoran. They're trying to get in so they can find work during the festival that is also taking place at the moment called Solstagia, which takes place every 50 years. The storyteller has a riddle which Malik's younger sister Nadia answers, and the storyteller grants her 1 wish. She uses the wish, and all of a sudden a vengeful spirit pops up and demands payment for using magic on his land, and as payment for the moment, he takes Nadia away until Malik can make a promise and carry out the task that is killing the heiress to the throne. This heiress happens to be a young girl called Karina. She lives in the palace with her mother. She is also an extremely complicated person. She is still grieving the loss of her father and her sister, who perished in a fire many years ago in the palace. Her mother is very strict and removed. She deals with these debilitating and almost daily migraines, which was so hard to see her go through, because I mean, I don't know what it's like to have daily migraines, but I do experience migraine, so that was just really, I think, compelling for me. Malik also deals with extreme anxiety, which was also really hard and hit really home. What am I saying? Hit home. So their worlds collide, they go on this adventure, they start to learn things. It's just so good. I don't want to say too much more about it because like I just think you have to go in and like have fun. It's an extremely fun book with a lot of heavy moments, a lot of light moments, and there's just so much nice writing, nice world building. The magic system and so many different systems that like kind of build this world are so wonderful. It's based on a lot of West African mythology, and it was just really good. It was so good. I loved it. I give it 4 stars. I can't wait to continue the series along into next year, and yeah. Next up, I read the Sandman Overture, Volume 1 by Neil Gaiman. I have to confess, I didn't really know what I was getting into with this comic, essentially, and I'm still a little bit confused because I think I'm missing a little bit of context. This book opens and we're following a whole host of very strange people, it seems to me. This is an extremely short first volume, so I'm missing a lot. There's so many thoughts that like I can't give you, but like from what I read, I enjoyed it. I'm still not really sure what's going on because volume 1 just kind of opens with a whole bunch of different scenarios and a whole bunch of different people experiencing different things and weird little events that start to grow out. I did read it though, and I did enjoy it, and I'm interested to see what the rest of this holds. So next I read Fortuna Sworn by KJ Sutton. I picked this up purely because of Becca and Ashley from Becca and the Books and a Frolic Through Fiction. This is an adult dark fantasy kind of fae romance. I guess it is a fae romance. I gave the first one 3 stars. For me, it was extremely entertaining, a super quick read that I just like binged so quickly. I just didn't want to put it down. It was so fun. It was a really fun read and I loved it. So this one opens and we're following a girl named Fortuna, and she is a nightmare. She's been raised in the human world, but she is a nightmare in that she has the ability to make you feel your worst fear and kind of essentially break your mind if you succumb to your worst fear when she lays her hands on you. So she has been mourning and searching for her lost brother Damon for 2 years in the little town where she lives. So one day when a fairy shows up and promises her to take her to her brother if she marries him, she of course agrees because she's been frantic to find her brother, who is all the family she has left. And so she's taken to the unseelie court of fairies, and there she finds her brother, but not in the way that she expected to. From there you follow her kind of going through these trials and tribulations in the court underground, and it's just good fun. It's just good fun. I did enjoy the first one. I was a little bit let down just because I don't love that whole like 3 trials fairy trope. I found it a little bit repetitive, but I also read this month Restless Lumber, which is the second book, because I was just looking for something really fun and easy, and it was so addictive. I really liked it. It was so entertaining. I ended up liking Restless Lumber a lot more than the first one, just because there's so much more that goes on in here. We're introduced to a really whole, bright, huge, colorful cast of characters, and I really like got so invested in the second book. I wasn't expecting to. I wasn't expecting to have so many feelings and like just like it as much as I did, as much as I enjoyed Restless Lumber, because it was so good. I ended up getting really attached to Fortuna. She is just like a really fun main character to follow. She's so stubborn. She has these beliefs that she refuses to let go of. She stands up for basically every single person ever, and it's just really nice to kind of watch her go through what she goes through and remain this like really resilient, cool person. There's a lot of romance, a lot of steamy parts, and just so much like adventure and weird things. This book, these 2 books, and I feel like this whole series is a mess, but it's a very enjoyable mess to follow and to listen to. I really love the audiobook narrator. I think she has a really cool voice, and I just really like these 2 books. It was so fun this month reading them, and I really can't wait to get to Deadly Dreams because that came out extremely recently. So if you like fairy romance, definitely try this out. I don't really like that genre, but for some reason I'm really enjoying this one. I read Agua Vido by Clarice Lispector. I think if I had to pick a favorite book this month, it would definitely be this one because this was so mind-blowing. I'm still feeling extremely not bright enough to understand a lot of what went down in here, but I think it's a book I just need to read again and again and again. I'm not even sure how to describe this book. So much poetry. This is a little book where Clarice Lispector, if you've never heard of her, she's an extremely talented, extremely famous Brazilian author, and it's just, she tries in these instances to grab hold of the moment, like the present moment, the present now, like these little bits and pieces that make up life, that you can't ever really experience because as soon as you grab onto one, it's passed into the other. There's so many questions she brings up in here. She strays so much towards the fear of death, but in the end, this book I think is a really beautiful celebration of life and all of this like pulsing vibration that makes up these moments that we live, and this very colorful life and this ever-changing like fabric of living and life, and how decisions inform the future, and wow, my tummy rumbled, how we live. And it's just really beautiful above all, even if like I couldn't really grab at everything that was being said in here, because it's just so intense. The writing in this book is just like out of this world. It's so beautiful, so strange, so magical. It's people have called it witchcraft because it's just so spellbinding, I guess. This is an extremely difficult little book to get at, and a lot of it just makes you feel a certain way, but you can't ever really tell what way that is or what's making you feel that way. But it was so impressive. I can't wait to read this more and more and again, definitely in a few years, and I can't wait to read more from her in general. So that is Agua Vido. I read one nonfiction this month, and that was The Princess Diaries by Carrie Fisher. I have a few things to say about this book. The first one is that I don't know if I would have read it knowing what was actually in it, because the whole, I guess, sales pitch for this book was that Carrie Fisher was cleaning her house and found these boxes of journals and diaries that she had written while filming the first Star Wars film. And I was so intrigued. You guys know I love Star Wars. Almost every single month I read like a Star Wars novel or a book related to Star Wars in some way. So I thought I would pick this up because I really wanted to know like what it was like working on Star Wars and being in Star Wars, and maybe stories and stuff that went down. That's kind of what I was expecting. What I didn't know is that the actual diary entries from Carrie Fisher while she was filming Star Wars comprise maybe like a very small part of this book. I listened to the audiobook, which is also narrated by her, which was nice. But the diaries themselves really only take up a very small sliver of this production. The first whole half, she's kind of outlining how she got to Star Wars, a little bit of her family life, a little bit of what she was doing before Star Wars, and then filming Star Wars, kind of how Princess Leia was, I guess, produced and created, and a lot of the decisions that informed her attire and who she was. And then the whole middle and eventually going into the diaries is just all about Harrison Ford. I had no idea about I guess the relationship on the set of Star Wars or when they were filming the first movie. The diaries are all about her relationship with Harrison Ford. It's exclusively just about her affair with Harrison Ford on the set of A New Hope. And it was really hard to read. Sometimes I actually had to like put it down and come back to it because these diaries are just filled with so much pain and anguish. Obviously at the time she was, I think, 19 and he was 33, and they were having an affair. He was married, and she obviously talks about all of the things that happened and went down and how she was feeling. The diaries are just so heart-wrenching. There's a lot of poetry in them. There's a lot of like confessional writing and guilt and shame and hatred, and she really fell in love with Harrison Ford, and essentially what she wanted to come from that relationship didn't happen, obviously, and it was just so sad. It's just really hard to see like such vulnerable writing coming from so long ago, coming from this place that you can feel like the rawness and the realness and the hurt that is there. So yeah, I had no idea about what was in these journals or any of the things that actually did happen in this book, but I don't know if I would have read it on its own. I don't love reading nonfiction memoirs, so I didn't. I did enjoy it to an extent, but it also felt like something I shouldn't be reading. I shouldn't be witnessing, something extremely private and coming from a place of hurt. And of course, Carrie Fisher explains before we read the journals that it happened extremely long ago. Obviously, nothing of it still exists in the present, but it was still so hard to read. So if you want to go into the Princess Diaries, I think maybe just knowing what it's about would be helpful, because I didn't. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but that is that. The last book I read, I loved it. This was a Christmas gift from my grandma. Thank you so much. It is The Phantom of the Opera, the graphic novel. This is illustrated and put together by Vargas Homey, and it was so good. Obviously, I gave it 5 stars. I enjoyed it so much. I don't know if I'm actually a huge fan of the art style that's employed in here when it comes to especially depicting our characters and stuff like that, but honestly, I loved it. Like, I would read anything attached to Phantom of the Opera, and any graphic novel that came out ever about Phantom, instantly into my life it goes. So yeah, this is the first graphic novel I've read. I'm not aware of any others that exist, so if you do know of any, please let me know. But I adored it. I'm so glad that I got to close off the year with such a fun experience. yeah, it was just really, really nice seeing a graphic novel of Phantom because it is such a visual novel. There's so many visual components and imagery and such lush depictions of obviously the opera house and our characters, and the decadence and of course beauty and ugliness are such huge concepts in Phantom of the Opera. So I think it was just absolutely wonderful to see them in here because it was so nice. All right, I think we finally got through all of the books I read. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please let me know what your last favorite book of the year was. Oh my goodness. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for coming to this last wrap up of the year, and I will see you very soon in my next video. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your support. Ciao.